Breaking news, a political earthquake has shattered the uneasy calm between London and New Delhi. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has officially blocked the entry of a high-level Labour delegation hours after Keir Starmer accused India of drifting toward authoritarianism. The order hit Westminster like a detonation. Visas revoked, meetings cancelled, the Foreign Office in lockdown. For the first time in decades, Britain, not India, was the one denied entry. And from that silence, a new chapter of humiliation began. London was stunned. The country that once ruled half the world had just been told no. In Westminster, fear replaced arrogance. Ministers argued. Phones rang. No one had a plan. Starmer's aides whispered the word they feared most: humiliation. The Foreign Office spoke of procedure. Delhi spoke of respect. One hid behind rules, the other drew a line. 2 days earlier, Starmer had accused India of silencing dissent and drifting from democracy, words that sounded noble in Westminster but imperial in Delhi. When the response came, it was not diplomatic, it was generational. An Indian minister said it plainly: we will not be lectured by our former rulers. Within hours, the pound fell to 106 rupees, its lowest in months. Traders warned £28 billion in bilateral deals were now in danger. British exports to India worth over £12 billion a year hung in the balance. In Delhi's parliament, applause thundered. This is not defiance, this is independence. For decades, Britain had spoken down to India with the tone of a tutor. Tonight, the students slammed the door on the classroom. The clash did not begin with visas, it began with memory. Britain once called itself the world's teacher, yet from Bengal's famine to Delhi's railways, it took far more than it ever gave. The empire ended on paper, not in tone. Every lecture from London still carried the weight of entitlement. Then Starmer spoke, not of trade, but of virtue. He tried to sound moral. He only sounded imperial. His lecture landed in Delhi like an echo from another century. Modi answered not as a student, but as a sovereign. Respect is not a courtesy, his office said. It's a condition. The numbers told the story better than words. India's GDP now exceeds Britain's by over $700 billion. Its population is more than 20 times larger. Its defence budget has doubled in a decade. One preached virtue, the other proved strength. London spoke of principles. Delhi spoke of power. This was never about trade. It was about who leads the century. The empire that once drew the map now finds its borders redrawn. The palace said nothing, not a statement, not a word. While ministers searched for blame, the king stayed still, the last figure of dignity in a government of noise. Inside Buckingham, aides whispered that His Majesty had reached out privately to Delhi. No threats. No anger, only caution. He understood what his ministers did not. This was not a diplomatic bruise, it was a fracture in history. Across Europe, papers called it Britain's quietest collapse. The world had moved on. Westminster had not. Its speeches sounded like echoes from a museum. Even within the palace, unease spread. For a monarch raised on the myth of the Commonwealth, watching India close its doors was not politics. It was punishment. Downing Street rehearsed apologies. The Foreign Office drafted pleas for dialogue. But nothing could erase the image carved into every headline: a kingdom once obeyed, now waiting to be acknowledged. And above that silence, the king remained, still crowned, but no longer obeyed. The chamber reeked of fear. For years, Westminster fed on noise, debates without consequence, gestures without gravity. But this time, the silence after Modi's blow was heavier than applause. Ministers mouthed cliches about dialogue, but their voices shook. Even the Prime Minister avoided the word India, as if the sound itself could wound. Briefings stacked like funeral notes. Reports spoke of confidence erosion, strategic doubt, market hesitation. None dared say the truth. Britain was no longer feared, it was pitied. In the corridors, aides whispered about leadership transition. Outside investors called it political downtime. But the truth was simpler. Westminster had lost its pulse. A government once fluent in lectures now struggled to form a sentence. As journalists pressed for answers, one official muttered, "We're not leading, we're reacting." It was the first honest lines spoken in the Commons all week. By night, the green benches look smaller, the portraits older. Power, once radiating from this room, now leaked into history. The empire that once ruled by voice had become a parliament that waits for permission to speak. The anger outside was quiet, the kind that comes when people realise shouting no longer matters. In Manchester, veterans folded their flags. In Glasgow, crowds gathered not to protest, but to watch. Britain had entered a new ritual. Public resignation. Pubs spoke louder than Parliament. They can't even defend an apology, one man said. What will they defend next? Our dignity. Television anchors debated optics, citizens debated survival, inflation rose, trust fell, and somewhere between the two, faith vanished. At the cenotaph, an old soldier left a note. We fought for respect, not regret. Cameras caught it, the government did not. Each day brought fewer headlines about India and more about collapse. Food banks overflowed, hospitals drowned. And still, ministers spoke of global leadership. On talk radio, a caller said, maybe it's not them, maybe it's us. The silence after that line was national. When nations stop believing they matter, they don't fall, they fade. Britain wasn't invaded. It retreated quietly from itself. In Nairobi, an anchor smiled. History has reversed the roles. In Delhi, commentators used one word, balance. No triumph, no mockery, just balance. That was humiliation enough. Across the former colonies, newspapers printed the same headline, the pupil surpasses the master. The symbolism required no explanation. At the BBC, editors debated tone. One said, it's just optics. Another replied, optics are power now. Even in Washington, think tanks murmured that Britain's relevance is now ceremonial. That phrase spread like prophecy. Inside the Foreign Office, maps still coloured in pink hung on forgotten walls. But the pink had long turned grey. Power had migrated east, not stolen, not seized. Simply abandoned. The irony was cruel. The empire that measured the world by longitude had lost its own direction. Every corridor in Whitehall felt colder, not from defeat, but from disuse. By the end of the week, India signed a new digital alliance with Tokyo and Seoul. The world applauded. London issued a statement history didn't notice. In classrooms, teachers spoke of the empire as myth. To students, it sounded fictional. Kings, colonies, ships. But the past wasn't distant, it was dormant. The young learned to apologise for what their ancestors built. The old apologised for what their children forgot. Between them stood a nation unsure what to defend. Starmer's stumble in Delhi was more than political. It was generational exposure, a mirror held to a country that no longer recognises its reflection. On social media, the young mocked empire nostalgia. In care homes, veterans turned off the news. The generations no longer argued. They disconnected. When nations forget their story, they become extras in someone else's. Britain's power didn't die, it dissolved in indifference. In Birmingham, a retired officer told a journalist, "We once ruled waves. Now we drown in self-doubt." That quote trended for a day, then vanished, like the country it described. History's final cruelty is not loss, it's irrelevance. Empires end twice, first in conquest, then in memory. And Britain was running out of both. While Westminster argued over tone, Delhi was redrawing maps. India, Brazil, Japan and the Gulf formed a digital trade corridor that bypassed London entirely. The new headlines read, "Partnerships without patrons, the century had turned. Not with war, but with choice." Nations once bound by British treaties now wrote their own. The Commonwealth, once a symbol of unity, had become a ghost of convenience. Britain tried to reassert soft power, but soft power without respect is just nostalgia. The world listened politely, then moved on. In Washington, an analyst summarised the shift. Britain still speaks fluent English. The world now speaks fluent independence. The phrase became viral. Investors began calling Delhi the new London. Even that comparison felt outdated. India wasn't replacing Britain. It was outgrowing it. The empire had once controlled trade routes. Now trade controlled the empire's memory. The sun didn't set on Britain. It simply forgot to rise. Empires rarely end with surrender. They end with silence. The kind that follows when the world stops answering. Britain, once the voice of global order, now echoes its own uncertainty. The king remains, the flag still flies, but the meaning behind them has thinned. India didn't dethrone Britain, Britain outlasted itself. Pride without reflection becomes parody. Leadership without humility becomes memory. And yet, perhaps that's the lesson. History respects those who adapt, not those who reminisce. If you've watched this far, you already sense it. The century has changed hands. Subscribe to Brit Alert News, where truth is spoken without permission and silence is never our policy.